Toyota spent over $400 million building the engine lineage behind this car. $400 million of cast iron, forged steel, and precision engineering poured into a single platform. The car was the Lexus SC300, and right now, one is being torn apart in a scrapyard. You can hear it. The screech of metal, the hydraulic hiss of cutting torches, the wet thud of hand-stitched leather hitting oil-stained concrete. That $400 million mechanical heart is ripped from its cradle to save a Toyota pickup, while the hand-finished luxury cabin surrounding it is weighed and sold for its scrap value. This is how a masterpiece dies, not with a crash, but with a dismantling. Built to isolate you in silence and wood grain, it became worth more as a donor than as a vehicle. To understand how that happens, we have to look at where it came from. The story begins in Newport Beach, California, in 1987. This was the home of Calty Design Research, Toyota's American design studio. The team there received a brief that was both simple and incredibly difficult. They needed to create a luxury coupe that would define the brand for the American market. Inside the studio, this was known as Project F3. You have to remember what cars looked like in the late 1980s. It was the era of the wedge. Design was dominated by rulers and straight edges. Cars were angular, sharp, and aggressive. The designers at Calty decided to reject all of that. They wanted to create something that looked like it had been shaped by the wind rather than a drafting table. The lead designer, Erwin Louis, took a radical approach. He did not start with sketches or computer models. Instead, he went to the supply closet and got balloons and plaster. He filled the balloons with wet plaster and began to squeeze and shape them as they dried. He was looking for organic, bulbous forms that could only be created by pressure and resistance. He photographed these plaster shapes and projected them onto screens to find the lines of the car. This is why the SC300 looks the way it does. It is a car composed almost entirely of compound curves. If you walk around a clean example today, you will see there is only one straight character line on the entire body. It runs from the front wheel arch to the rear. Everything else is fluid. It has a drag coefficient of 0.31, which was remarkable for the time. It looked like nothing else on the road because it was designed like nothing else on the road. This design process happened against a very specific economic backdrop. We often talk about the Japanese asset bubble on this channel. This was a time when Japanese corporations had access to capital that seemed endless. The directive from Toyota headquarters was not to build a profitable car. It was to build the best car possible. Cost was a secondary concern. You can feel this economic context in the physical object. When you sit inside an SC300, there is a sense of heft that simply does not exist in modern vehicles. The dashboard is not a thin plastic shell. It feels like a solid architectural element. The buttons on the center console require a deliberate push. They have a damped, heavy action that speaks of expensive springs and careful engineering. This is what we mean when we talk about intentionality. Every surface you touch was considered. The wood trim was real hardwood, cured and polished to a furniture-grade finish. It was a cabin designed to isolate you from the outside world completely. The goal was silence. The engineers wanted a car that could cruise at triple-digit speeds while the driver spoke in a whisper. They used heavy sound deadening materials throughout the chassis. They filled pillars with foam. They designed that complex door hinge specifically to allow the long doors to open in tight parking spaces without hitting adjacent cars. This obsession with quality created a strange paradox. The car looked like a spaceship from the future, but it felt like an old English library inside. It was heavy, substantial, and incredibly serious. It did not invite you to drive fast. It invited you to drive far. But a beautiful shape and a quiet cabin were only half the equation. Underneath those organic curves, Toyota was about to install a piece of engineering that would become far more famous than the car itself. The exterior was designed in California, but the mechanical heart was pure Japanese over engineering, and that is where the story gets complicated. To understand why this car feels different from anything built today, you have to look past the leather and the wood. You have to look at the metal itself. The chassis, known internally as the Z30 platform, was not simply a shortened sedan frame. It was a dedicated architecture built with a level of structural rigidity that bordered on the obsessive. Toyota engineers placed the engine slightly behind the front axle centerline. They called this a front midship configuration. It was a racing concept applied to a luxury cruiser, designed to keep the heavy iron block from ruining the car's balance. The budget for this development cycle was staggering. The V8 engine found in the SC300, the one UZFE, reportedly cost over $400 million to develop. That is a number that seems impossible for a single engine program. But Toyota was not just building an engine, they were building a reputation. They needed a motor that was smoother than a BMW and more reliable than a Mercedes. That investment created a halo effect that trickled down to the entire car. Even if you bought the six-cylinder SC300, you were driving a chassis engineered to handle the torque and weight of that massive V8 flagship. But for the SC300, the story is not about the V8. It is about the inline-six, the 2JZGE. This engine has become a myth in the automotive world, but in the early 90s, it was simply the base option. It is a study in material excess. The block is cast iron, not aluminum. It is heavy, dense, and incredibly strong. Inside, Toyota used forged connecting rods, the same high-strength specification used in the turbocharged variant found in the Supra. This was over-engineering in its purest form. The naturally aspirated engine only produced 225 horsepower. The bottom end of the motor was strong enough to handle double or triple that amount. It was like building a bank vault to store a piggy bank. That margin of safety is why you still see these engines running smoothly with 300,000 miles on the odometer. They were never stressed. They were barely even trying. There is a strange detail in the specifications that most people miss. The SC300 was rated at 225 horsepower. The Toyota Supra, which used the exact same engine, was rated at 220. The luxury car actually made more power than the sports car. It was a result of different intake manifold tuning, but it highlights the strange hierarchy of the time. The Lexus was the premium product. The Supra was just a Toyota. Yet, all this potential performance was deliberately suppressed. The suspension was a double wishbone design at all four corners, a layout usually reserved for dedicated sports cars. But the tuning was completely different. Where a sports car would use stiff rubber bushings to sharpen steering response, the Lexus used soft, compliant bushings to absorb impact. They prioritized isolation above all else. They wanted to erase the texture of the road. Toyota even offered a system called active control suspension on this platform. It was described as the world's first fully active suspension, using hydraulics and computers to eliminate body roll entirely. It was a piece of technology so complex and expensive that almost nobody ordered it. It was engineering for the sake of engineering. The standard suspension did exactly what it was told to do. It filtered out the world. It turned sharp corners into gentle arcs. It took a chassis rigid enough for the racetrack and an engine strong enough for drag racing, and it wrapped them both in a thick blanket of velvet. The car could corner, but it didn't encourage you to. It could accelerate, but it did so with a polite hum rather than a roar. This created a machine that was technically brilliant, but emotionally conflicting. It had the hardware of a gladiator, but the manners of a butler. You had a cast-iron race engine paired with a transmission that shifted so smoothly you could barely feel it. You had a chassis stiff enough for high-G cornering that floated over potholes. It was a masterpiece of subtlety in a market that only rewards extremes. It was the absolute peak of Japanese bubble-era engineering. It was capable of doing everything, yet it was designed to do nothing but soothe you. And that specific combination was exactly why it never achieved legendary status. The tragedy of the SC300 was never a matter of engineering capability. It was a matter of identity. This is why the Lexus SC300 never achieved legendary status. It occupied a no-man's land between luxury and sport, too refined for the tuner crowd and too restrained for the prestige buyer. When the car arrived in showrooms, it landed in a marketplace that did not quite know what to do with it. It was a machine built to answer a question that very few people were actually asking. Consider the landscape of the early 90s luxury coupe market. At the very top, you had the Mercedes-Benz SEC and the BMW 8 Series. These were heavy, 12-cylinder or large V8 Titans designed for the Autobahn. They were status symbols for the ultra-wealthy. Below them, you had the American personal luxury coupes like the Cadillac Eldorado or the Lincoln Mark series, which were floating sofas designed for comfort above all else. And then you had the dedicated sports cars like the Nissan 300ZX or the Chevrolet Corvette, which were raw, aggressive, and compromising. The Lexus SC tried to be everything at once, which meant it struggled to be anything specific to anyone. It was too small and sporting for the traditional Mercedes buyer, who wanted sheer physical intimidation and badge heritage. Yet, it was too soft and heavy for the BMW buyer, who wanted feedback and engagement. It occupied a middle ground, the Grand Tourer, which is a romantic concept in Europe but a difficult sell in North America. In the United States, we tend to buy cars for what they do at the extremes. We buy fast cars to go fast and luxury cars to go slow. The SC300 was a car that went fast slowly. This identity crisis was compounded by a brutal economic reality: the appreciation of the Japanese yen. When the project began, Toyota could afford to over-engineer the car because the exchange rate was favorable. They launched the car with aggressive pricing to undercut the Germans. In 1992, you could buy an SC300 for just over $31,000. It was a bargain. It offered build quality superior to cars costing twice as much. But as the decade wore on, the currency markets shifted. Toyota could no longer subsidize the export costs. The price began to climb, not because the car was getting better, but because the money was getting weaker. This price inflation killed the car's momentum exactly when it should have been peaking. The SC300 launched at $31,100 in 1993. By 1996, the base price had risen to over $44,000. That is a 40% increase in just 3 years for a car that received no significant mechanical updates. The V8 model had crossed the $50,000 barrier. The value proposition evaporated. Suddenly, the SC was not just a clever alternative to the Germans, it was priced like one. And when you are priced like a Mercedes, buyers expect the heritage of a Mercedes. Then there was the badge itself. Lexus officially stated that SC stood for Sport Coupe. This created an immediate conflict between the marketing department and the engineering department. If you sell a car as a Sport Coupe, buyers expect a certain visceral experience. They expect exhaust noise. They expect a suspension that communicates the texture of the asphalt. Instead, the SC300 gave them isolation. The steering was accurate but light, filtered through layers of hydraulic assistance. The manual transmission, a rare option installed in fewer than 4,000 cars, was the only nod to genuine sportiness. But even that was a paradox. Why would you want a manual transmission in a car designed to be the quietest vehicle on the highway? It was a mixed message. This conflict was visible in the cabin itself. The interior was a masterpiece of old-world luxury execution. The buttons and switches had a heavy damped resistance that felt like expensive home audio equipment. But the centerpiece was the instrument cluster. It used an electroluminescent display, a technology shared with the flagship LS400 sedan. When you turned the key, the needles didn't just light up. They glowed with a cold, neon-like phosphorescence that seemed to float in a black void. It was mesmerizing. It was high-tech. But it was also distant. It was a dashboard designed to be looked at, not a set of gauges designed to be read at a glance while sliding sideways through a corner. The car was simply too polite. It refused to shout. In a market that rewards aggression and clearly defined roles, the SC300 was a masterpiece of subtlety. It was a librarian with the body of an athlete. It was a vehicle that respected your comfort too much to ever truly thrill you. And while the first owners, often doctors, architects, and lawyers, appreciated this restraint, it meant the car never captured the imagination of the public. It was respected, certainly, but it wasn't lusted after. This lack of passion was the car's commercial undoing. But the ultimate irony was that while the SC300 was trying to be a dignified luxury coupe, its platform mate was busy becoming a movie star. The SC was suffering from a case of mistaken identity, but its sibling was about to become the most famous car of its generation. And that comparison would haunt the Lexus for the rest of its life. We have to correct the historical record here. There is a persistent belief that the SC300 is merely a Toyota Supra in a tuxedo. The common narrative suggests that Toyota took their legendary sports car, softened the suspension, added sound deadening, and glued a Lexus badge to the hood. But the timeline tells the exact opposite story. The Z30 platform was not derived from the Supra. The The Supra was derived from it. The Lexus SC went into production in 1991. The fourth-generation Toyota Supra, the famous A80 chassis, did not arrive until 1993. The luxury coupe was the origin point. The sports car was the derivative. When Toyota engineers sat down to build the Supra, they did not start from a blank sheet of paper. They started with the subframes, the suspension geometry, and the core architecture of the Lexus SC. The car that became a pop culture icon is, in engineering terms, a stripped-down version of the car that became a footnote. This shared DNA is both the SC300's greatest strength and its ultimate curse. Because they are built on the same bones, the two cars are like a mechanical Lego set. You can unbolt the suspension arms from a Supra and bolt them onto an SC with minor modifications. You can take the massive brakes from the turbo model and fit them to the Lexus hubs. The sway bars, the differentials, and even the exhaust systems are largely interchangeable with minor modifications. For a long time, this interchangeability was a secret kept by a small circle of mechanics. But as the 1990s ended, the secret got out, and it created a rivalry that the Lexus was destined to lose. The Supra became the hero of the import tuner generation. It was the star of movies that defined car culture for millions of young people. It was the car that could destroy Ferraris on the highway. It was aggressive, loud, and unapologetically fast. The Lexus SC300, meanwhile, was invisible. It was the car your dentist drove to the golf course. It was the car you saw parked in front of upscale department stores. The media narratives of the time reinforced this divide. Magazines praised the Supra for its skid pad numbers and its 0 to 60 times. They praised the Lexus for its build quality and its silence. One was a weapon, the other was a tool for comfortable travel. This is the great irony of the platform. The SC300 is, by almost any objective metric, the better road car. It has a slightly longer wheelbase, which makes it more stable at high speeds. It has a stiffer body structure because it was designed to be quiet without a roof, even though it was never sold as a convertible in the United States. It has better visibility and a more usable interior. If you were to drive across the country, you would choose the Lexus every single time. But nobody fantasizes about driving across the country comfortably. They fantasize about speed, and because the Supra captured that fantasy so completely, the SC300 was relegated to the shadows. It became the responsible choice, the boring sibling in a family of athletes. This dynamic created a tragic phenomenon in the used car market. As the value of the Supra skyrocketed into the stratosphere, the value of the SC plummeted. Enthusiasts realized they could buy a Lexus for a fraction of the price of a Toyota, strip out the engine, and throw the rest of the car away. Thousands of perfectly good SC300s were slaughtered just to harvest their engines for Supra projects. The car that had donated its chassis to create the Legend was now being cannibalized to keep the Legend alive. It was a cannibalization born of disrespect. The market saw the SC as nothing more than a wrapper for a 2JZ engine. They didn't see the beautiful door hinges or the plaster-molded curves. They just saw a cheap source of parts. But as the supply of clean chassis began to dry up, something shifted. A new generation of drivers began to look at the SC300, not as a donor, but as a destination. They realized that the poor man's Supra might actually be the thinking man's Supra, and this realization would give the car a second life that its original designers never could have predicted. The transition from the country club to the drift track happened slowly, then all at once. As the original owners, architects, and dentists traded in their SC300s for newer crossovers, the cars hit the bottom of their depreciation curve. Suddenly, a vehicle that cost $40,000 in 1992 was available for $4,000 in 2005. This price drop opened the door to a completely different demographic. The second owner was not looking for isolation or wood grain. They were looking for a cheap way to access the legendary JZ architecture. This is where the specific rarity of the manual transmission becomes critical. Lexus produced over 80,000 Z30 chassis vehicles in total. But the SC300 with a factory 5-speed manual transmission accounts for only 3,883 units. That is roughly 12% of the total SC300 production run. It is a statistic that makes a manual SC rarer than many dedicated exotics. Yet, for years, the market treated them as disposable. This scarcity created a perverse incentive structure. For a long time, a crash Supra with a salvage title was worth more than a pristine SC300. This led to the donor car tragedy. Countless SCs were purchased solely to be stripped. The engines were pulled to swap into Nissan 240SXs or older Toyotas. The robust W58 transmissions were harvested. The rest of the car, that beautiful hand-finished interior, the complex door hinges, the rust-free chassis, was sent to the crusher. It was a mass extinction event for clean examples. Then came the drift culture. The SC300 has a long wheelbase, which makes it incredibly stable when sliding at high speeds. It is heavy, but the torque of the inline-six makes it manageable. As the supply of Nissan S chassis cars dried up, drifters turned to the Lexus. They welded the differentials. They stripped out the sound deadening the engineers had spent millions developing. They replaced the compliant bushings with solid metal pucks. They fitted hydraulic handbrakes and cut the fenders to fit massive wheels. Today, finding an unmodified SC300 is statistically improbable. If you look for a BMW 8 Series or a Mercedes SEC from the same era, you can still find them. They were expensive to maintain, so they were either kept by wealthy enthusiasts or parked. But the Lexus was reliable enough to be abused. It could survive the punishment of a teenage owner or a budget drift build. This creates a profound melancholia when you see a surviving example. You realize you were looking at a survivor of a mechanical war. The drift tax has now made clean shells expensive, but it is too late for the thousands of cars that were backed into concrete walls or gutted for their drivetrains. The durability Toyota engineered into the car became the reason for its destruction. It was too tough to die, so people killed it. The tragedy is that the second life of the SC300 completely erased the identity of its first life. The sport coupe finally found its sport, but it was not the gentleman's grand touring Lexus intended. It was tire smoke, zip ties, and fiberglass body kits. The cabin silence was replaced by the scream of open wastegates. The car finally achieved a form of legendary status, but it was as a raw material for modification, not as a finished object of desire. The end of the SC300 was not a sudden crash, but a long, slow exhale. The sales data paints a picture of a car that the market simply outgrew. The market had moved on to SUVs and German sedans, leaving the Japanese Grand Tourer behind. In 1992, the first full year of production, Lexus sold over 20,000 units combined. It was a triumph, but the decline began almost immediately. By 1996, volume had fallen to just 5,000. By the final year in 2000, Lexus moved only 631 cars in the entire United States. It was a 97% drop from the peak. The first major casualty of this apathy was the manual transmission. After the 1997 model year, Lexus discontinued the 5-speed option. It was a quiet admission of defeat. The company had built a legitimate driver's car, but the customers only wanted a cruiser. With only 3,883 manuals ever produced, the Sport Coupe officially stopped being sporty. It became a boulevard cruiser. The enthusiasts who would later worship this transmission were still in elementary school, leaving the cars to gather dust on dealer lots. In 1998, Toyota made one final attempt to modernize the platform. They introduced VTI variable valve timing to both engines. The V8 gained a new 5-speed transmission and significantly more power. The inline-six gained torque. But these were invisible engineering updates in a car that looked increasingly like a relic from the Reagan era. The automotive world was moving toward sharp edges and aggressive styling, while the SC remained a smooth, organic bubble. It was an analog device in a rapidly digitizing world. The final blow came with the announcement of its successor. The concept that became the SC430 was a radical departure. It was a hardtop convertible with a V8, and styling that many critics called questionable. But more importantly, it was built on a different philosophy. The Z30 was a product of the bubble economy, engineered with an unlimited budget. The new car was a product of the cost-cutting era. It was built to be profitable, not perfect. When the last SC300 rolled off the line in July 2000, it marked the end of Toyota's over-engineering period. We didn't know it then, but we were losing the last affordable car built to the standards of a flagship. The tragedy of the Lexus SC300 is that it was a masterpiece without an audience. It was too soft for the Supra crowd and too subtle for the Mercedes crowd. It was a victim of its own perfection, a car so competent at everything that it simply failed to be truly famous for anything. It represents a specific moment in history when luxury meant material permanence rather than digital screens. It was a car defined by the weight of its door hinges, not the speed of its processor. If you see one today, respect it. It is a reminder of what we lost. It is not just a Supra in a suit. It is the last great analog grand tourer. Now, here is the thing about that. Toyota built a car for people who had already arrived. They designed every surface, every hinge, every frequency of road noise to speak to someone who no longer needed to prove anything. The SC300 whispered. It was a car at peace with itself. But across town, Honda was building something for a completely different kind of driver, not the doctor who had made it. The one still on the way there. A car that didn't whisper. It waited. And in 1995, that difference meant everything. The 1995 Acura Legend sits on the pavement with a quiet confidence that is hard to find today. It does not look like just another used car. It looks like a historical artifact. This vehicle represents the final breath of the bubble era in Japan. That was a specific moment in time when capital was endless and engineering ruled over accounting. It was a time when a company known for small motorized bicycles decided to challenge the German hegemony. The car holds a unique contradiction. It uses a front-wheel drive platform, yet it was designed to look and drive like a rear-wheel drive exotic. To understand why this machine feels so different from anything on the road today, we have to go back to the moment it was conceived. The existence of the 1995 Acura Legend is not just about automotive design. It is a direct result of the trade wars and industrial anxieties of the 1980s. In the early part of that decade, the Japanese automotive industry faced a massive political wall in the United States. The fuel crises of the 1970s had driven American consumers toward the fuel-efficient Honda Civic and Accord. This decimated the market share of domestic American manufacturers. In response, the United States government negotiated the voluntary export restraints with Japan. This agreement limited the total number of vehicles Japanese automakers could export to the United States. This restriction created a paradox that birthed the premium Japanese sedan. If Honda was legally limited to shipping a fixed number of units to the United States, shipping low-margin Civics became economically inefficient. To maximize profit per unit under the strict quota, Honda needed to sell more expensive cars. This necessity was the catalyst for the Acura channel. It launched in 1986, 3 years before Toyota introduced Lexus or Nissan brought us Infiniti. The Legend was the flagship of this experiment. It was designed to prove that a maker of reliable hatchbacks could compete with the established power of Mercedes-Benz and BMW. But Honda did not do this alone. In November 1981, Honda signed a letter of intent with the British Leyland Motor Corporation. They agreed to jointly develop an executive car. They called it Project XX. This partnership was a marriage of convenience and necessity. It profoundly influenced the DNA of the Legend. Honda possessed world-class engine technology and manufacturing efficiency. They could build engines that would not leak or break. However, they lacked institutional experience in designing luxury chassis and interiors that would appeal to Western tastes. This was an area where British Leyland excelled. Despite their notorious quality control issues, the British possessed a deep knowledge of body engineering. They had a heritage of wood and leather crafting that Honda coveted. The collaboration was fraught with cultural and engineering friction. Honda engineers were accustomed to rapid, iterative cycles and strict tolerances. Their British counterparts operated under different constraints and labor relations. But this friction created something special. The resulting vehicle possessed a European firmness. It felt substantial and heavy at speed. This was distinct from the floating ride of American luxury sedans of the era. The 1995 Legend felt planted. It had a sense of heft that is often attributed to German engineering, but here it was derived from a British and Japanese synthesis. The 1995 model year also marks the historical boundary of this relationship. In 1994, BMW acquired the Rover Group. This move blindsided Honda. They viewed BMW as a direct competitor in the premium sector. Honda moved quickly to sever ties with the alliance. This corporate divorce adds a layer of sadness to the 1995 Legend. It was one of the final artifacts of a unique East-West industrial experiment. After this, Honda retreated to total independence in its luxury development. The 1995 Legend stands as the last cosmopolitan Honda luxury car. It was built with a global mindset before the company turned inward. It represents the end of a specific type of collaboration. It was the last time Honda looked outward to define what luxury meant. This unique heritage set the stage for the engineering choices that would define the chassis. But this British and Japanese synthesis created something unexpected. Honda's engineers made a choice that defied every efficiency rule in the automotive industry. A choice so expensive and so deliberate that it would become the defining characteristic of the entire car. And it all starts under the hood. The most defining technical characteristic of the 1995 Acura Legend is hidden beneath the metal. It is the feature that most sharply distinguishes it from modern Acura sedans and its contemporary rivals. It represents a bold refusal to compromise styling for packaging efficiency. This trait is typical of the era when engineering management still held more power than the finance department. When you open the hood of almost any front-wheel drive vehicle, from a 1990 Honda Civic to a modern crossover, you expect to see the engine mounted transversely. That means it sits sideways, with the crankshaft running parallel to the front axle. This layout is brilliant for space efficiency. It allows for a very short hood and maximizes the size of the cabin relative to the length of the car. However, the 1995 Legend utilizes a longitudinal engine mounting. The six-cylinder engine sits north to south in the engine bay. The transmission is mounted behind it, mirroring the layout of a rear-wheel drive car. A drive shaft then runs forward from the transmission to a differential mounted alongside the engine oil pan to drive the front wheels. Why would Honda engineers choose this complex, heavy, and expensive layout? The primary driver was aesthetics. By mounting the engine longitudinally, the Legend could feature a long, low hood and a short front overhang. This mimicked the prestigious dash-to-axle ratio of rear-wheel drive competitors like the BMW 5 Series or Mercedes E-Class. A transverse engine typically dictates a blunt nose and a long front overhang, which is often associated with economy cars. The 1995 Legend features a stance often described as a crouching tiger. It is low, wide, and aggressive. This wedge-shaped profile communicated speed and elegance. It helped the car shed the image of an economy car upstart. But beyond looks, the longitudinal layout solved critical dynamic issues inherent to front-wheel drive platforms. Transverse cars often suffer from extreme front-heavy weight bias, leading to terminal understeer. The longitudinal layout allowed Honda to push the center of gravity of the engine further back behind the front axle line. This achieved a near-ideal 60-40 weight distribution. This distribution is crucial for the narrative of lost luxury. Modern luxury cars often mask their imbalance with electronic stability control and torque vectoring by braking. The 1995 Legend achieved its balance mechanically. This resulted in excellent high-speed stability and resistance to crosswinds. It made the car a superior grand tourer on the highway. Furthermore, transverse engines typically require unequal-length half shafts to reach the wheels because the transmission is offset to one side. This leads to torque steer, the tendency of the car to pull to one side under hard acceleration. The longitudinal layout of the Legend allowed for equal-length half shafts. This effectively neutralized torque steer. This was essential for the 1995 model, particularly the GS trim, which pushed 230 horsepower. While competitors were moving toward cheaper McPherson strut assemblies to save cost and space, the 1995 Legend utilized a sophisticated four-wheel independent double wishbone suspension. The front suspension featured new wheel-shaped lower arms and large-angle constant velocity joints, designed specifically to accommodate the longitudinal engine. The benefit of double wishbones lies in their camber gain characteristics. As the suspension compresses during a turn, the wheel tilts inward, keeping the tire contact patch flat against the road. Strut suspensions generally cannot match this geometry. This adherence to double wishbone geometry is a hallmark of peak Honda engineering. It is a refusal to compromise handling for cost. The engineering prowess of the 1995 Legend is often discussed in the same breath as the Acura NSX. Both vehicles were developed during the Formula One golden era for Honda. The Legend was the volume capabilities showcase. It demonstrated that the same company could build a comfortable cruiser that did not fall apart in the corners. It was the everyday supercar companion, engineered with the same philosophy of human-centered performance. The chassis was not just a container for passengers, it was a statement of intent. But a chassis is nothing without a heart. For the final year of production, Acura gave the Legend two very different hearts. One was built for the boardroom. The other was built for something else entirely, something that would soon make this car a cultural icon in a place far from any showroom. For the 1995 model year, the powertrain became the central protagonist of the story. The Legend was powered by the C32A engine. This was a 3.2-liter single overhead cam, 24-valve V6. It was a significant evolution from the 2.7-liter V6 of the first generation. It was designed to provide the torque necessary for American driving styles. However, 1995 saw the bifurcation of the engine lineup into two distinct personalities, known as Type 1 and the high-performance Type 2. The Type 1 engine was the choice for the traditional luxury buyer. It was the standard application for the Legend Sedan L and the Legend Sedan LS. This engine produced 200 horsepower at 5,500 revolutions per minute. It generated 210 pound-feet of torque. The characteristics of this engine were optimized for smooth, quiet cruising. It featured a specific valve timing arrangement designed for idle stability and fuel efficiency. It was the standard luxury mill, adequate, refined, and nearly indestructible. It was designed to be invisible to the driver, but it lacked the visceral thrill of its sibling. The true jewel of the 1995 lineup was the Type 2 engine. This engine was standard in the Legend Coupe and the Legend Sedan GS. It was a masterpiece of naturally aspirated tuning. It squeezed 230 horsepower from a single overhead cam design without forced induction. This 30 horsepower advantage over Type 1 was not achieved through software tuning. It was achieved through factory hot rodding techniques rarely seen in mass-market luxury sedans today. The engineers aggressively altered camshaft profiles. The valve timing was changed so that intake valves opened 5 degrees sooner and closed 10 degrees later than Type 1. That increased the duration of the intake charge, allowing more air and fuel mixture to enter the cylinder at high revolutions per minute. Intake valve lift was increased to 10.2 millimeters. This physical alteration of the valve train geometry allowed the engine to breathe more deeply. The intake valves were enlarged to 34 millimeters in diameter to maximize flow velocity. The engineering team also employed a variable induction system. Both engines used this system, but the Type 2 featured a specialized intake manifold with shorter, tapered runners. This design utilized the Helmholtz resonance effect, using sound waves created by the opening and closing valves to ram air into the cylinders at specific ranges. It was most effective above 5,000 revolutions per minute. The Legend of 6 engine shares architectural similarities and manufacturing tolerances with the engines found in the NSX. While the NSX was a mid-engine exotic, the Legend showcased Honda's volume manufacturing capabilities. The auditory experience was a critical part of the package. The Type 2 utilized a high-flow exhaust system. It featured a larger catalytic converter and a muffler capable of flowing 120 liters per second, significantly higher than the 97 liters per second for Type 1. That reduced back pressure and gave the Type 2 a distinctive throatier growl under load. That differentiated the auditory experience from the whisper-quiet Lexus LS400. This engine required premium fuel. It rewarded the driver who was willing to rev it to its 6,700 revolutions per minute red line. It was an engine with a dual personality. It was docile around town, but ferociously eager when the aggressive cams came on the pipe in the upper register. It featured Honda-programmed fuel injection and a direct ignition system, with individual coils for each spark plug. The elimination of a distributor was advanced for the early 90s. It contributed to the legendary reliability of the car. The engines also featured dual knock sensors, which allowed the engine computer to aggressively advance ignition timing for more power while protecting the engine from detonation. That was a crucial feature for the high-compression Type 2. This mechanical complexity set the stage for the specific trim levels of the final year. But this engineering philosophy, refusing to compromise and building for feel instead of efficiency, would define everything about the 1995 Legend. It came with a price, not just in dollars, but in the car's fate. Because by 1995, the automotive industry was changing, and the Legend's refusal to adapt would seal its destiny. The 1995 model year represents the absolute peak of the curve. It was the swan song for the chassis. Acura knew the end was near, so they applied every possible option to the car to maintain momentum. The result was the most refined version of the platform ever built. The standout model for this final year was the Legend GS sedan. This was not just a luxury barge, it was a legitimate four-door sports car. It took the high-output Type 2 engine and paired it with a suspension tuned for aggression. It featured stiffer spring rates and revalved dampers. It used upgraded dual-piston brake calipers taken directly from the coupe. Visually, you could spot a GS by its specific 16-inch, 5-spoke alloy wheels and the body-colored grille that removed the chrome for a monochromatic look. But the true magic of the GS lay in the transmission options. While most luxury buyers in the mid-90s were content with an automatic, Acura offered a 6-speed manual transmission in the sedan. This created a vehicle that effectively had no direct competitor. It was a reliable, front-wheel drive Japanese sedan that could sprint to 60 miles per hour in 7 seconds. Today, the 1995 Legend GS sedan with a 6-speed manual is considered a unicorn in the collector market. Production estimates suggest fewer than 400 of these manual sedans were built for that final year. Finding one today is nearly impossible. While the sedan did the heavy lifting for sales, the coupe was the design icon. It sat on a shorter wheelbase than the sedan, which gave it sharper handling characteristics. The most striking visual difference was in the rear fenders. The coupe featured distinct blister flares over the rear wheels. These muscular haunches gave the car a stance that the slab-sided sedan lacked. It looked fast even when it was parked. It featured frameless windows that automatically dropped slightly when you pulled the door handle, then sealed up tight when closed. The coupe also featured a piece of technology that perfectly illustrates the concept of lost luxury. The LS trim featured automatic door suckers. If the driver gently latched the door, an electric motor would engage and pull the door fully shut. In 1995, this feature was practically unheard of in this segment. It was usually reserved for the ultra-luxury Mercedes S-Class. It remains a party trick that owners love to demonstrate today. It speaks to a level of complexity and cost that manufacturers are rarely willing to put into a sub-6-figure car anymore. No discussion of this era is complete without mentioning the aesthetics of status. In the mid-90s, nothing said success quite like the gold package. Many 1995 Legends were fitted at the dealer level with gold-plated emblems. They had gold exhaust tips and sometimes gold-accented wheels. While modern tastes might find this flashy, it is a period-correct detail that screams 1990s luxury. It is increasingly preserved by collectors for its nostalgic value. But the gold package was not just about flashiness. It was a status symbol in a very specific world. A world where the 1995 Legend meant something completely different than it meant in the Mercedes dealership down the street. And that is where the real story of this car begins. The interior of the 1995 Legend offers a tactile experience that has largely vanished. The buttons and stalks have a damped, heavy feel. The turn signal stalk engages with a satisfying mechanical thunk rather than a hollow plastic click. The volume knob on the Bose radio has a weighted resistance. The leather used in the LS and GS trims was gathered leather. It was soft and pliable on the door cards. This is distinct from the heavily coated, durable, but hard leather found in later models. The wood trim, while often simulated, had a depth and gloss that mimicked fine furniture. This attention to physical touch created a sense of permanence. It made the car feel like it was carved from a single block of material. This quality did not just appeal to doctors and lawyers. It resonated with a completely different demographic that was about to make the car a cultural icon. While the double wishbone suspension and the longitudinal engine placement established the car's capability on paper, it was hip-hop culture that cemented the Legend's status as an icon. In the early to mid-1990s, the Legend became the vehicle of choice for the hustler on the rise. It occupied a very specific, almost strategic, sociological niche. In the high-stakes environment of the 1990s in New York, driving a Mercedes-Benz S-Class or a Lexus LS400 attracted heat. It drew the unwanted attention of the police, who profiled the drivers, and it drew the attention of rivals or stick-up kids looking for a target. The Legend was different. With its Honda badge, it was understated enough to move undetected through traffic. It was low-key. Yet because of that aggressive crouching tiger stance and the known price tag, it was respected enough to command attention when it was parked. It was the perfect metaphor for the rap mogul in the making. Powerful, reliable, but not loud enough to get you arrested. No single individual has done more for the preservation of the Legend's cultural cachet than Christopher Bridges, better known to the world as Ludacris. His connection to the car is not a paid endorsement. It is a genuine love affair that speaks to the quality of the machine. He purchased a 1993 Legend L in champagne gold with a tan interior long before he became a household name. It was his dream car. Even after achieving multi-platinum success and gaining the ability to buy any exotic supercar on the planet, he kept the Legend. He put over 250,000 miles on it. He featured it on his album covers. For him, and for many others, the car was not a disposable appliance. It was a companion on the road to success. In 2015, Acura restored his personal car, acknowledging that this specific model had become a character in the story of hip-hop itself. This sentiment was echoed in the lyrics of the Notorious B.I.G. and the Junior MAFIA canon. They elevated the Legend above the common herd. It was the car you bought when you made your first real money. It was a milestone. Perhaps the most famous lyrical reference comes from Jay-Z in the track I Love the Dough. He raps about snatching the P-89s packed in the drawers and clapping the doors of your Acuras. This line is often analyzed by enthusiasts. On one hand, it refers to the violence of the era, a double entendre for shooting. But on a tactile level, it speaks to the build quality we discussed earlier. When you slam the door of a 1995 Legend, it did not rattle. It closed with a heavy final thud. It was a vault. That sound became part of the soundtrack of the streets. The Legend had earned its name on the street, which is the hardest place to earn respect. It had become more than a car. It was a symbol. But just as the car reached its cultural peak, just as it had proven it belonged at the table with Mercedes and BMW, Acura made a decision that would erase all of that in a single year. The Legend was the hustler's milestone. It was the first six-figure car for the self-made entrepreneur. It bridged the gap between the corner and the boardroom. It had earned its name on the street, which is the hardest place to earn respect. The marketing team at Honda had named it the Legend, but the culture had ratified that title. It was a name that meant something. It carried weight. And that is what makes the next chapter of the story so confusing. Just as the car had achieved this mythical status, just as it had become a genuine cultural icon, the corporation decided to throw it all away. If the Legend was so good, why did it die after 1995? The discontinuation of the Legend nameplate is a case study in failed branding strategy. In 1996, Acura made a fateful decision that haunts the brand to this day. They rebranded the Legend as the 3.5 RL, which stood for Refined Luxury. This was a marketing decision driven by a specific corporate insecurity. The executives feared that the model names, like Legend and Integra, had become stronger than the brand name itself. They worried that people were buying Legends, not Acuras. They wanted to emulate the alphanumeric hierarchy of BMW and Mercedes, believing that letters and numbers signaled higher prestige than actual names. The consequence was catastrophic. Legend was an evocative, powerful name, with genuine street credibility and deep brand equity. RL was anonymous alphabet soup. It meant nothing to the streets and nothing to the boardroom. Sales plummeted. The Legend had emotional resonance. The RL had none. But the name change was only the surface-level symptom of a deeper issue. The Japanese asset price bubble had burst. The economy that had funded the over-engineering of the Legend had collapsed. The industry was facing the yen shock, where the strength of the currency made exporting expensive cars nearly unprofitable. The era of engineers ruling the company was over. The accountants had taken control. The successor, the 1996 RL, was noticeably decontented. While it was still a fine car, it felt softer, it felt cheaper. The 1995 Legend represents the high watermark of manufacturing expenditure per unit. It was the last car built before the cost-cutting measures truly took hold. The 1996 model lost the aggressive wedge-shaped styling in favor of a conservative, upright profile that blended into the background. It alienated the enthusiasts who had coveted the GS6 speed. There was also a philosophical shift. The luxury market had moved toward the isolation experience pioneered by the Lexus LS400. The Lexus was designed to numb the driver, to separate them from the road entirely. The Legend had always offered analog luxury. It provided mechanical feedback. The hydraulic speed-sensitive power steering told your hands what the front tires were doing. It was a Japanese BMW, focused on engagement. The new direction was to chase Lexus, but without the V8 engine that the market demanded. This was the glass ceiling for the Legend lineage. By 1995, the luxury flagship standard was a V8 engine and rear-wheel drive. The Legend, despite its brilliance, was still a V6 front-wheel drive car. The Type 2 engine was a marvel, but it lacked the effortless low-end torque of the V8 competition. Acura stubbornly refused to build a V8 or a rear-wheel drive platform, sticking to their efficiency philosophy. As German reliability improved and Lexus cemented its dominance, the Legend got squeezed. It was too expensive to compete with the Accord, but it lacked the cylinder count to compete with the S-Class. The 1995 model was the final argument that a V6 could sit at the big table. When it left, the argument ended. We also have to talk about the concept of analog luxury. The 1995 Legend communicates with you. When you press the gas pedal, a physical cable opens the throttle body. There is no computer deciding if you really meant to accelerate. When you turn the wheel, hydraulic fluid pushes against mechanical resistance. Today, everything is simulated. Electric power steering guesses what you want to feel. Drive-by-wire throttles smooth out your inputs. The 1995 Legend was the last time a Japanese luxury car trusted you to actually drive it. It was the end of the mechanical age and the beginning of the digital age. The 1995 Acura Legend stands as a monument to a specific philosophy of car building that no longer exists. It was a vehicle that refused to conform to the rear-wheel drive dogma, yet succeeded in creating a driving experience that was uniquely sporting. It bridged the gap between the conservative boardroom and the streets of Brooklyn. It earned its name honestly. It was not just marketing, it actually became a legend. If you want to hear more stories about the machines we have lost to time, make sure you subscribe.